Next up, fascinating fight. This is the fight I started with, guys. I went pretty deep into this one. So I'll start us off on this one if you guys don't mind. It's Talita Alencar taking on Stephanie Luciano. And Luciano Rondinha, she's an interesting fighter. She's got a pretty upright stance. She comes forward, throws a lot of varied strikes, mixing it up with the kicks, the punches, and walks a lot of her opponents down. Has a pretty impressive win over Michelle Oliveira, who I believe is a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt from Nova União. She's also an IMAFF, excuse me. I probably butchered that, but in any case, the International Mixed Martial Arts Amateur Federation or whatever the hell it is, she was a world champion there as well. So she was highly touted coming into the LFA, and she was able to get a win over her in a very contentious fight. And the reason that is kind of brought up in these conversations is because it's a very similar archetype in some ways, where it's a girl that wants to bring in that wrestling and that jujitsu. However, I think the physicality is way different between the two of them. Maria Oliveira, a little bit more long, gangly, and also she's so muscular that it's almost like a hindrance to her game. Like she was gassing out pretty early in that fight, and she also would get like second wins, but then she couldn't sustain them. So I feel like there was a lot of things that were, just a little bit greasy in that fight, right? Where Michelle Oliveira, it was a great win, but I did feel like Michelle Oliveira kind of fell apart there. And like the mental collapse was happening from round one. So I felt like that great win, I could almost take a touch away from that. But then you look at the other wins that she's gotten, it looks pretty decent. Here's my problem. I can't find the fight that she lost. If you guys have found it, I'd love to see it. So the Andressa Romero fight at Fight Music Show in 2022. I looked for it and I couldn't find it. And I'm normally pretty good at finding those things. Granted, I was crunched for time, so I was moving a little bit quicker than normal. But I was able to find most of her other fights. I couldn't find the Tainara Santos fight either in my first scan, but I found everything else from her professional career and watched it. And she seems like a girl that is aggressive. She comes forward. She can push a pace. And so there's a lot of things to like there. She's got a pretty formidable physicality in Rondinha. But now let's talk about her opponent here in Talita Alencar, who I do think has kind of been built up a little bit more steadily for this kind of level, right? Where you've got a very young girl here who debuted at 17 years of age on the other side, where she's taking on a 32-year-old who's a five-time Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu world champion here from Brazil. She is 4-0, excuse me, as a professional. I watched all of her fights before I got started here as well. Two of them she ended by finish, I think it was, or three of them, excuse me. And then the one decision, the one of them, it went almost the whole 3 rounds, but then she was able to secure the rear naked choke. But when you look, she does a pretty good job. There was a few things I found concerning, which is she's not an insta finisher on the ground. There was a handful of times, I think it was in that fight that went to the 3rd round, where she fell over the top and her opponent was able to get back out. But she did a good job recovering. Her opponent tried to storm back on her with strikes. She just grabbed a hold of her, disciplined her against the fence, then took her down again. So I felt like she showed a lot of the right instincts there. And she also pushed the pace hard for 15 minutes. That last fight in the LFA was the one that really sold me on what she could do, because she was starting to get lit up a little bit on the feet, right? I think her striking is just poor. And for me, the defining question of this matchup is she able to get takedowns? Because I think if she's able to get takedowns, then this is probably going to look like a pretty clinical beatdown, because I do think she's very good on top. While she's not a perfect finisher, right? I did mention that time she fell over the top. She did such a good job of operating a series-based jiu-jitsu game. It's takedown, pass to the half guard, pass to the full mount, and from the full mount, it's either get to the head and arm series or get to the gift wrap and try and get to the back and start punching somebody in the face. So she just did a pretty good job of being aggressive, relentless on top, and creating a lot of danger for girls. She reminds me, and I think they mentioned on commentary, like a Jacqueline Emerim and some of these kind of girls, that's what they bring, is like they could just create a ton of pressure. If they get on top of you, it's a problem for you. Not just the jiu-jitsu, the fact that they can create all this pressure. They could pin you. They could hold your wrists. They could dominate you with strikes. So for me, that's the real question here. I've seen Rondinha put in some slightly uncomfortable positions, but then she's always able to scramble back up, or the person makes a mistake. But I do feel like a lot of times she's had her way physically and she's been able to stop situations before they got started. And I'm curious what happens when she gets in extended grappling situations. I'm curious if that's what led to that decision loss that she has. Maybe it was just striking on the feet, but I have a suspicion in my mind that it could be predicated on somebody getting takedowns, because I feel like on the feet, she's an operator. She's a dangerous girl. So I feel like fun fight, interesting scrap. Let me take a look at the lines here, because again, I'm coming in a little blind. It doesn't surprise me to see Alencar here as a minus 215 favorite, but I will say Luciano by knockout is plus 1,000. I feel like if she was to win this fight, that's how she does it, right? I just feel like this girl sometimes engages a little too long on the feet. She's a bit hittable. I would criticize both these women for being too hittable on the feet, but I do think the other girl wears it a bit better. Whereas Talita, sometimes she just looks a little bit like, whoa, like when she gets hit by shots, but she does a good job of engaging back in the wrestling in the clinch. So she's smart enough there. She does a good job with her clinch strikes as well. That's the last thing I'll leave you with on this. I don't think she's a one-note fighter. I don't think she just has that one ability to win. But I would say laying minus 215 when a fight would be like, at best evens on the feet, it is definitely a dangerous proposition in WMMA when she's the shorter girl. But I do talk about shorter people, proximity to hips. I think she's going to get double legs here. I think she's going to get takedowns. And I think if she does, it's going to be real problems. And I wouldn't be surprised if she finished. And the one other thing I'll mention, I wouldn't be surprised if she finished a TKO herself. They're both lined here about plus 1,000 to win by TKO. But I feel like she showed a lot of defensive responsibility in the grappling. I'm talking about Luciano. Luciano didn't seem like a complete fish in the grappling, but I do think the pressure and the dominance physically, she could just sit on her. And when you've got somebody who's 5'1", stout, really strong, and they're just sitting on you with a gift wrap, punching you in the face, they could get the finish that way, especially in WMMA, where you start throwing in a couple of grunts, and then it's all over. So that's what I'm looking for here. Might look for an ends by KO if I can find a good price. But I just feel like these are two really violent girls, and I'm expecting a violent scrap. Wouldn't be altogether stunned if either girl won, but I feel like they both have a path to a finish here. So I like violence as well. What do you think, Gordo?
Violence. I like the sound of that for sure. No, it is a very interesting one. And before doing any tape, especially when me and you are going over the Tapology a week in advance, it looks like Alencar seems to be the A side, someone who is an undefeated jiu-jitsu girl, someone who is coming in with all the credentials, someone who is, let's say, propped up for success against someone who does show deficiency here. But you dig in, and there's a lot of red flags on both sides of things. Number one being the age factor here for Alencar, 32-year-old prospect with a lot of jiu-jitsu experience, but really a lack of fundamental striking, a lack of dominant wrestling, and a lack of really just overall MMA sense, right? That kind of factors into Liam's thing, right? The younger fighter with more experience here on the side of Luciano. And what she does have here is also more size, right? She has the ability to be a physical fighter there, pose threats for someone like Alencar. And as much as I think that Luciano has a path to victory to win this, being the more physically dominant fighter and being the more, let's say, well-rounded mixed martial artist, it's only going to take one mistake from Luciano to end up in a problem here with Alencar. And that's the first thing I looked for on tape, was how well can Luciano stay away at range. And what I'm seeing from this is someone in Luciano who, although she's a big, strong girl, she likes to use that size. She likes to use that aggressiveness to her advantage. And in doing so, she really crashes into the clinch. She really crashes into all these things, extends on her strikes. And in doing so, you're putting yourself at close proximity to someone like Alencar to just hop on the back and be a submission threat early on, because that's what she needs. She needs to close that distance. And Luciano's skill set is really going to allow her to do that. Now, in that being said, am I going to go out there and lay minus 210 on someone who I think needs to capitalize off a mistake from Luciano? Not too often. And I'd like to see more offensive wrestling, more, let's say, high level of competition from Alencar before trusting her at this price tag. But I do think she might have picked a win. I do think she has the X factor here, being that fight ending capability on the mat. And I do think that she should be slightly favored, just I don't know to which extent. You look at the level of competition. Alencar's face overall combined opponent's record is 4-5-1, whereas Luciano's is 9-1. She's facing better level of competition, you can say. 5-1, also fights out of a great fight team called Gordon Fight Team. Just had to mention that. And I think that overall it is one that there are red flags on both sides. So with that being said, all the physicality and striking is there for Luciano. she crashed into the clinch too much. I think that submission and grappling success is going to be there for Alencar, at least early on. And I don't mind that violence with you either. I do think Alencar gets it done, but sketchy early goings for sure.
It's a great fight on paper. The only thing that makes me nervous about a fight not to go is just that both of these women are really tough. But I feel like they both just have too much danger, and I feel like the pace of the fight will probably force one of these people to gas out. But Luciano did have good cardio from what I saw on tape, at least in that Oliveira fight. She outlasted her pretty easily. Pierce, what do you think about this one, brother?
Yeah, so I actually got a bet on this fight. I this morning after I saw the face-offs, I played Stephanie Luciano at plus 225. I think it's a close fight, man. I do think Talita's the rightful favorite, but I'm not gonna lie. I mean, I don't know if she's the A side because this is I think it's like a month notice for Talita. Stephanie was supposed to be on it against some other girl from Italy, and she pulled out, and they called up Talita. And my issue with Talita is, yeah, we all know that she's a great grappler, but I think it's a little too early for her, man. I'm not. She's still green in MMA, man. You look at some of her fights, her wrestling. It's getting better fight by fight. It's not where I want it to be. You tried to compare her to Amarin, and I don't think that's a bad comparison, but I just think she's very green when it comes to like the MMA wrestling. I mean, she's not fighting the best girls. I mean, Kelsey Arneson, she's better than her record indicates, but I don't know, man. When I look at Luciano, I see a young girl, 23 years old. She's making improvements fight by fight, and in the time she was taken down, I didn't see the loss either, but I think I'll be able to find it, and I'll send it to you. But I would assume it was probably the grappling. Hopefully not though, since I bet her. But I like Luciano. It's like on the mat, she seems aware. She has good technical get-ups. I feel like she is not a fish off her back. Where I actually also did play Alencar by sub, what it opened at. I think it was like plus 225 or something like that. I just like to think if Alencar is not getting the sub, yeah, sorry. If Alencar is not getting the sub, that the line might be a bit wide here. And I think Luciano, if it goes to decision, we saw in her fight against Michelle Oliveira, the commentators were talking about how much of a high credentialed black belt Michelle was. Could play out like that fight. Maybe it's Talita can't get takedowns, she's pulling guard, and maybe it doesn't go under just because of the fact that Talita might just fall to her butt, and Luciano might not oblige to go into the ground. Where I don't know, I just think all the values on Luciano, where Talita is still green in MMA, and we aren't necessarily sure what level she's operating at. She's got good jiu-jitsu, so if you're gonna play Talita, it's sub or just play the dog, because I don't. If it goes to decision, I don't know how much value is in Talita. Maybe she gets 15 minutes of top control, but they're both scrappy. So the under is a bit worrying from that aspect, but I think it's Luciano a pass, man. I just don't trust Alencar's wrestling at this stage in her career.
You know what? I think that's fair enough. I'll revisit a little bit. I feel like she did a pretty good job introducing takedowns every round against Arneson, especially once it became like necessary on the feet, right? She got hit a little bit in the early going, and she was like, all right, F this, and just took her down. And she actually got back the round as well. I think they ended up even on the strike count, but it was like one girl had been destroyed and the other girl, just got hit with a couple of shots on the feet. So I felt like she kind of, the one thing I liked about her, she understood optics. Both these women actually understood optics from what I could tell in terms of later on in rounds, they're turning it up. They're trying to get the late takedown. They're trying to get some kind of late moment. And the other credit I'll give, the thing that I like about Luciano as a finisher, when she had somebody hurt, she's just throwing like a 15-piece combination. She's like forcing the referee to intervene. So many MMA fighters would rather, just pick and prod and like try and find the perfect knockout shot. And she's like, just like throwing, 50 shots in a row and forcing the referee to intervene. So I kind of like that from her as well. If you give her a window, if you start to look like you want to quit, she will take you out of the fight. So that's something you do like for an under.
And Stephanie, I think it was her last fight. She went 5 rounds, and she went a hard 5 rounds. So maybe she's got the cardio advantage here. I haven't really seen Toledo face any adversity, so be interested in what she does if she doesn't get the takedowns here.
I would say just that one fight where she got the finish in the third round. She kind of, looked for a few finishes, wasn't able to get it. Sometimes that causes an adrenaline dump, but I thought she did a good job in both of those fights, just staying on her game plan, not deviating. So that's something you like to see, but also at 4-0, you really don't want to get too out over your skis, minus 225, pretty big indication for a green fighter.